What a goofball I am.
It's fine.
Now we are live. Hey, everybody.
Practice.
We were having a practice session without all of you, but we're glad you're here to join us for the anchor team. Oh my goodness. I am your host, Alyssa Hitchborn, filling in for my husband who has recovering from an extensive travel overseas. He will tell you all about it in time. And I've been having a delightful time talking to Dr. Mary Cuff, who's written this book. It's called Mother to Mother, Spiritual and Practical Wisdom from the Cloister to the Home. And spoiler alert, it's not what you think. It's actually quite beautiful. The nuns and Mary, in writing it, are not suggesting we recreate the cloister in the home. It's actually ways to incorporate those ideas in the home, but not to recreate it. And I think that that is key. It's very important and beautiful. I'm going to let you know a little more about Mary. She is, well, let's see. Let me read Mary's bio. She is a homeschooling mom, yay, an independent scholar and writer. She holds a PhD in American Literature and Classical Rhetoric from the Catholic University of America, and is a proud alumna of the University of Dallas. Her writing has appeared in Crisis Magazine, Modern Age, and Law and Liberty. She's been a guest on Guadalupe Radio and Relevant Radio. She and her husband are homesteading-lite in rural Pennsylvania. All right. Well, Mary, yes, I believe we spoke a little on our pregame, our accidental pregame, about about homesteading-lite, which it sounds like Mary is more advanced on the course than we are, but we both have chickens, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
chickens are good. I think chickens are a great way to start homesteading.
Yes, they're very forgiving.
Yes, the lowest level of commitment, I think. And you do learn things. We had a broody hen once, and we actually hatched a chick from
You're
that.
so lucky.
Yes. So we've never done incubators or anything like that, but we actually have hatched a chick that is part of the flock now. And we haven't had a broody hen since. So
I have a broody hen right now, but I think she's been sitting too long.
Ooh. Well, you can always candle the eggs.
Yes.
To see
yes.
if they're still...
I need to go out and do that.
Yes. Chickens are very interesting. I love it. I've conditioned them. So when I walk outside now in the backyard, they all come running toward me because they know I might have kitchen scraps.
Oh, yes. So they love the bucket.
They're very excited to see me. Yes, the bucket. But yes. Okay. We're talking tonight about Mary's book. And I think we're going to start more in chronological order of the book, Mary, than we did in the pregame, which is we're going to start with the intro, because I want you to tell that story about seeing the Capuchin sister at, was it the playground?
Playground, yes. Yes. So I write about this in my introduction, but sort of the inspiration behind the book, or the largest inspiration, sort of the trigger that pulled the trigger on the book, was I was at a playground one day, and there was a Capuchin nun there, and there's never Capuchin nuns at playgrounds.
Yeah, right.
So obviously I'm going to go over and talk to her, and we're talking about, various things. And she happens to mention at a certain point, she says, contemplative nuns are the stay-at-home moms of the religious vocation. And
yes, that's beautiful. I love that.
Shocking to me, right? I never thought of it before. Yeah, and it's so true, because nuns, we call them mother, we call them sister. They very much are interested in creating a monastic family in a real sense. It's not just a metaphor. It's not just a cute way of, referring to each other. Like, that's real. They intend to create the monastic family. And so the contemplative nuns are the stay-at-home moms of the monastic family vocation. And I thought to myself,
I love that.
Yeah. So I thought to myself, well, what else do we have in common? And we get the book.
Okay, right. So that is beautiful that you felt you could go up to her and get that commentary. I was telling you before that I was raised in Southern California, where I don't think I'd ever seen a nun in a full traditional habit ever. Not
Wow.
until I was in college did I actually see for the first time women in full, traditional habits. And I have to be honest, it was jarring for me. I was kind of like out of
Who are
place.
they?
Yeah, I know. Right? And it was just, when you get so used to seeing, like I told you, my principal at my grade school wore business suits, and there was another nun there who wore like the short veil and like a blue skirt, but not
Yes.
traditional habits at all.
Right.
And I was more acquainted with nuns who were more interested in, shall we say, changing things up at the
Sure.
parish. Like, let's have the kids wave banners on the altar and, like sit at the foot of the altar and things like that. Like, that was my experience of nuns growing up. So
Sure.
I'm happy to say I've had better experiences as
Better.
as an adult. And so I was delighted when I saw the communities that you chose for the book. And so, if you don't mind, I'd like you to talk about some of them again.
Sure. So I wanted to get communities that, that showed sort of the breadth of the monastic vocation. Obviously I wanted orders that took their vocations extremely seriously. So these are all very serious monasteries. They're not somber and sad monasteries. They're awesome,
Right.
wonderful monasteries, but they take their vocation extremely seriously. I wanted to get some more in, but it turns out nuns are extremely busy people. And so, but I'm blessed that I got the 5 that I did. So I'll just sort of run through what their names are. We've got the Gower Benedictines, recently famous with their incorrupt foundress. That their mother superior actually had to write me back and be like, sorry, it's taken me so long to respond to these particular sets of questions. It's not every day you dig up an incorrupt foundress, and I'm still trying to figure out what to do about that. And I was like, you're fine. so
Oh my
they're in the
yes.
book.
Have you read The Life of Sister Wilhelmina?
As much of it as I can find.
Awesome.
She's wonderful. Yeah, very
awesome.
cool person. Yes, and I talk about her a little bit in the book. I have like different sections about the monastic communities to sort of introduce the reader to the communities at the beginning of the book before we get into all the discussion. So we've got the Gower Benedictines. We have the Roswell Poor Clares. They famously, Mother Mary Frances. Most people don't know about her, but she was a bestseller in the 1950s. Hilariously funny nun.
That's amazing.
Wonderful, wonderful writer. I read everything of hers that I can find. And she writes about the vocation of a nun, but you read it and you're like, I need to take notes.
and I love that because she was asked was it 1981? They were supposed to update their constitutions. Yeah. And I love that she said, no, we want the grill, the cloister, the habit, the veil. And that she said the modern world, rather than saying, oh, these things are outdated for the modern world, she's like, the modern world wants a sign of contradiction.
Right.
It needs to see. Yeah, it needs it. And, they need to be taught what the meanings are behind the forms.
Yes,
to make them comprehensible. And I was like, wow, I mean, just what a simple way to articulate what's so true about why religious should wear habits, right? They make not just that making them instantly recognizable, but it conveys the deeper meaning about what their whole vocation is. So I'll say, going back to like the nun who's the principal wearing the business suits, like it never occurred to me that she had some kind of like prayer life, right? I just thought she ran the school. Right. So there is something, right? Because she looked very businessy. Like there is something about the habit that says, no, this is part of my job, right? Like the police officer, the fireman, whatever. It's very important. And I thought she articulated it so beautifully, like in defending the traditional habit. So Mother Mary Frances, for all of you, look for her books.
Yes. One day may she be canonized. I think she's up there. So you've got those two communities. Then we have the Byzantine Carmelites in the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania. I was very excited to get them because they bring this very cool mesh of East and West together. And I met their foundress. She's Gumina, which is the Eastern word for abbess, and she's 96 years old, sharp as a tack, hilariously funny person, wonderful story. So they're in the book. Then we have the Capuchins, also here in Pennsylvania, and the Cistercians up in Wisconsin. So I wanted to get this whole sort of crowd of differences within the monastic vocation, and that's sort of why I concentrated on those monasteries, is because they kind of each bring a different flavor to the same vocation. And so I wanted to see their sort of different perspectives with the questions that I was going to ask them.
Right. So let's talk about that now, that you wrote the book kind of in a question and answer format, but with sort of an introduction to each topic that you wrote, and then a question that the nuns then answered, and you chose different communities' answers for each of the questions, covering a vast range of topics, actually, I think. But doing it well. I actually really respect succinctness, in work. Well, it's because, for the people out there, I mean, we have viewers like who are, mothers who have raised their children, right? They're all grown up and gone. And then there's people like, that I think the two of us, we're still kind of in the thick of it, raising the babies. And so sometimes reading something, having it put in a more like pithy sections is helpful, because I don't think that it detracted from the content at all.
Good.
I was reading some of it today, and I was just blown away by some of the things both that you said and the nuns said. So I'd like to maybe talk about some of those sections.
Sure.
Obviously, for those who are listening or watching, we're talking about Dr. Mary Cuff's book, Mother to Mother, Spiritual and Practical Wisdom from the Cloister to the Home. It is available at Tan Books. They are awesome people. They always are they work with us so well. We love having their authors on. So if you want to buy it, it's at Tan. But Mary is going to maybe give us a little bit of a flavor of the book. We've been talking about the intro, about how she got into writing the book, the monastic orders that she profiled. And so then you said you met them, but you also sent them questions, or how did that work? How did the interviews?
Well, so some of the orders were too far away for me to unfortunately meet them face to face. I have 5 kids, and the youngest one is 6 months old, so I wasn't going to be able to transport my little community across the deserts to meet their communities. But we did write back. Most of the monasteries, and I wrote handwritten. Well, I typed them, but they wrote back with beautiful handwritten answers. Yes. Nuns, for some reason, have the most perfect handwriting.
It's part of the training.
It must be. It's beautiful. But so we wrote back and forth, snail mail letters, a couple nuns, again, depending upon the charism, some orders, they have access to email. So we would email back and forth. And I actually drove to the Poconos in a blizzard and met with the Byzantine Carmelites. They let me stay for a long weekend with my, at the time, youngest, and now he's my second youngest. The book sort of sits in between 2 kids.
Okay. Well, I mean, hey, good on you for just, maybe we can talk about, we'll get to the book, but maybe we can just talk about like that for a second of motherhood in modern times. Right. I think that that's something that at least I was thinking about as I was reading the book. The idea that maybe just as like when I was growing up and I didn't really have a very good understanding of what cloistered nuns or any nuns outside of the ones that I had seen, at my Catholic school, what their lives, like their everyday lives looked like. That's something when we visited the Carmelites also in Pennsylvania for the win on
lots
the
of
monastic orders
here.
I asked them, because we had a group of girls, to just kind of talk about what their day was like, because it's something I wasn't very familiar with. But now talking just about lay mothers and motherhood in modern times, our days look, I would say, different in some ways than perhaps, mothers from the past. Same, right? Same things, but I think different too. Like not just the technology, but maybe the pressures are different. You want to speak to that a little bit, like just what motherhood in modern times looks like?
Yeah, well, I think motherhood in modern times, I mean, there's a lot of differences. I mean, like monastic communities, and I think this has always been true about lay mothers, is that like monastic communities, we all kind of do motherhood slightly differently. And that's good to a point. There's good ways to be nuns and bad ways to be nuns. So there's also good ways to be moms and bad ways to be nuns or moms. But within the good ways, there's actually quite a lot of flexibility depending upon your strengths and weaknesses and the strengths and weaknesses and needs of your family. I think a lot of people kind of have this mentality. I don't know where we got it, that stay-at-home moms sort of sit on the couch and stare at their kids all day. I don't know why we would do that, or that we're always in the kitchen, cleaning something. I am often cleaning something, but but that isn't, and I think I talk about this in the book. The pieces that make up motherhood are not what motherhood is, and a lot of people can get overly focused on a piece and forget that it is part of a whole. Just like the human body isn't just a finger, right? It's the finger is necessary for the proper functioning of the body, but the whole is what makes up the human being. Motherhood is so much more than cleaning and cooking and in my case teaching math and things like that, but it all serves that kind of higher entity of motherhood that I'm striving to fulfill. I think in terms of what modern mothers have, we have a lot of challenges that mothers in the past didn't have, right? The isolation, I have a chapter on that in the book. A lot of mothers struggle with isolation. We just don't have other mothers around. I fortunately do have a lot of like-minded Catholic mothers with children of my kids' age around, but I didn't always. We lived in several different places, in our family voyage across time. And, it has been very isolating. And, when I was a young parent in grad school, I was the only person I knew who had a child, much less was married. Yeah. And that can be extremely isolating. Also isolating that mothers find is that a lot of people don't really know what to do with you, I find, if you don't have something other than motherhood that's apparent, right? So, and I think maybe that was, trying to speak charitably to the business suit dressed nun. Maybe she felt the stress of that people don't know how to relate to you if you don't have a 9-to-5. They don't know how to relate to you if they can't sort of ask you career sorts of questions, right? You're kind of this strange alien world to them that they can't access. And that's unfortunate because there's so much there and so much that mothers can contribute. And, we are interesting people, I swear. But I think that a lot of modern mothers struggle with that. And that's a fear that a lot of modern mothers have, that we kind of get lost in this world that doesn't really have a category for us anymore. And I think that's a uniquely modern problem that mothers struggle with a lot, that we didn't really have in the past, because the concept of a woman being a mother and making that her focus was more normal back then, in previous days, even though women have always had opportunities to do other things as well. I think in the past, though, the emphasis was your vocation, to your family and to your children, that comes first, no matter what else, right? And that still should be the focus of women and mothers today. Our vocation comes first, right? And everything else can sort of surround our vocation, can enhance our vocation, can flourish from our vocation, but should never get between us and our vocation. And I think the struggle to sort of figure out how to do that is more difficult for modern mothers.
Yes, absolutely. And, I was thinking, like, you're a homeschooling mother, so am I.
Mhm.
And, I want to give kind of a shout out to some of like the people of like, I would say my mother's, our mother's generation who were kind of the pioneers in that,
Yes. Yes.
because, they grew up in a time where kids either went to like public school or Catholic school. I mean, nobody homeschooled, right? In like the 50s or 60s. And
Right.
then, you go through an era, 70s, 80s, 90s, where women are expected to have careers and jobs outside the home. And so, like, to be the set of those pioneers who were homeschooling, they must have thought their peers must have thought they were super weird. I mean,
I have memories of that. My mother homeschooled us from the start to the end. The first time I stepped foot in a classroom was in college, and I don't know how my mom did it. We have so many resources, and
yes,
homeschooling
yes,
becomes so not mainstream, but like sort of mainstream adjacent. Like everyone has heard of homeschooling. That's a
yes.
normal thing. People don't
There's
ask
so
you if you're
many, and there's
breaking
so
the
many
law.
curricula and resources you can use. And
Right,
you're right, like we have huge community of homeschoolers here.
right,
When I was growing up, I think we were the only ones who homeschooled, like anywhere remotely nearby. Like I remember going on field trips where we had to drive a long distance to meet up with other
yes,
homeschoolers because it just wasn't local.
right,
So I think that that's part of that. I was thinking about the Byzantine abbess in the book too,
yeah,
and she said, she kind of went through a lot of the upheaval in the 60s
mhm,
in her communities. She was a Carmelite, and she speaks a little about this in the book, that she went through all these upheavals, but she said, I was never unhappy. She's like, I was
right,
suffering, but I had that joy. I knew this is what I wanted to do. And I just had to,
right,
I knew that God would help me find a way to do it, right? That would
right.
bring me peace and joy. And I think that that's part of that mothering in modern times
Yes,
idea. Like we're finding that way. Like we had like the women in our mother's generation who kind of pioneered saying, I'm gonna step away from the boardroom, right, and
right,
go back to the schoolroom because
right,
my children need that,
right,
because the schools
exactly.
are starting to fail them, right?
Yes,
And we certainly see that today where many schools are little more than indoctrination centers for certain political,
exactly,
ideologies. And
exactly.
so homeschooling takes on an even greater thing now. And I think it's actually part of the charism of motherhood.
Yes,
That's something that was absent perhaps in previous generations where kids went away to school, but I think it's there. We're
yeah,
forming them for heaven, and we should form their minds to appreciate truth, goodness, and beauty on the earth too, and that
exactly.
seeing things that we study leading us to God.
Right.
Um,
I think that it's always been part of our vocation as mothers to be, our children's educators. I mean, they learn from us, even if we aren't holding a ruler and a curriculum book, right? They learn from us from the beginning. They study our faces. They are constantly learning from us. And so even if a woman does not see herself as a homeschool mom, even if she can't, or she has a great Catholic school option that she uses instead, she's still her children's primary educator because they're still watching her. She spends
yes,
an amazing amount of time with her children, and even if she doesn't know it, they are learning something from how she is and what she is doing. Not just her teaching them how to do things, but how to be someone. And I think that's very important. There's a chapter in my book where we talked about the concept of fostering love in the community, and the idea that we really talked about there was, you know it is a mother's task to foster love, to model love, and to teach love.
yes,
And if we don't do that, then we have basically ripped the heart out of the home, right? And
right.
so
It's a house now.
children sense that, right? Yeah. And children sense that, they know that, right? Even if we're there doing things for them, if it's not done with that love that only a mother can give, they feel it, even if they can't put words into it, right? And I think that's such a huge part of our role as educators, is that we are actually in our very actions and our facial expressions, in how we respond to our children, we are teaching them what love means. And that's very important.
Oh, absolutely. And, I think of a lot of, people, this is anecdotal, of course, but the people I've met who, we're all wounded by sin, of course,
Yes.
but there are people who are very broken by, whether it's abuse or situations in their life. And many times, some of the people I've met who have the deepest wounds are the ones they didn't know love from their parents.
Exactly.
And sometimes I'm not trying to say this as a low bar, but sometimes I remind myself of that when I'm having a day where I'm like, oh, I'm not giving my kids, the right curriculum, or I didn't do this right, or we didn't do that right. And I think to myself, like, isn't it most important to create a home where love and warmth and hospitality are the key ingredients? Obviously, the other stuff matters too. I want my kids to be able to read, but that has to be fundamental and first, and that in sense, that's why I want to bring this back to the book now. I actually think that homeschooling, in some ways, to my mind, it's like the cloister, in the sense that we're building a community at home with the children. That I love that the different ages are together all day, that they have to learn patience and understanding and compassion with their siblings. And that, to me, is probably similar to life in a monastic community, right? With different temperaments and personalities.
The different temperaments, the different personalities, different ages, right? Different struggles, different strengths. It all kind of meshes together in a monastery. And the other beautiful thing about a monastery, a contemplative monastery that is like a homeschool family, is that, you don't get to pick, like initially when they bring the novice in and they say yes, but is she going to be the same person 50 years from now? Maybe not, but you're still going to be her sister 50 years from now.
That's right. That's right. So you better learn to love them and get along. That's what I tell my children. I actually loved the anecdote. It was in one of the later chapters. I think it was the Cistercian nun. She said that there was somebody who had been in their community, but 90 years before her. Blessed.
I
was
can't
it
remember her name?
Mariella, or Maria Gabrielle? I'll find it. But
something like that.
She said that this woman offered her life to God for unity in the church, and that she contracted tuberculosis, died in her 20s, but that the nun's point in telling the story was, she said, every time there's an issue of like disunity in our community, I ask for her help, and she's like, and she never fails. She's my friend in heaven. She never fails to give it. And I thought, gosh, again, we all have, as mothers, we know there are times when our children don't get along or rub each other the wrong way, or maybe we're the ones having the difficult relationship with a particular child. And that idea that we have those friends in heaven, that they're still part of our community, that we should be calling upon them for their help, for that unity in the home and the community. I thought that was beautiful.
And I think it's important too to sort of have that familial feel with them too, because the saints in heaven, the blesseds in heaven, the anonymous people up there in heaven, they are still, they are blessed in heaven, but they are also still humans too, right? So just like contemplative nuns are still humans, and moms are still humans, the saints are still humans. And so it's wonderful to cultivate like a friendship with them, a motherly, daughterly relationship. I included 2 saints at the very end of my book that I thought were good nun saints for moms. A common complaint is that there's so few mom saints out there, and we're getting more. We've got some amazing ones that are out there, but I think that sort of a lot of my favorite saints are ancient monastic saints, because they led some wild lives. And so anytime I'm having a bad day, I just think, okay, Hilda of Whitby did this.
That's right.
She didn't lose her cool. And if she could handle that, I think I can handle this, And so I included 2 monastic saints, an old one and a new one, in the back of the book, as a sort of, these are sort of saints that I view as sort of saintly mother figures that I admit sometimes I gripe pray to them, where I'm like, oh, what do I do about this? When you need another mom to rant to, instead of gossiping, I just rant, pray up to them.
Hey, I like
and they
it.
kind of fix it for me down here.
Yeah, no, I like it. No, and to have that friendship, you're right. And to teach our children to have that friendship is huge.
Yeah.
But okay, so here we go. Here's the big question. What can we talked about I love that, that analogy of the homeschooling home as similar to the stay-at-home moms in the cloister, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what can the cloister teach a busy mom who's been up at 3 a.m. with the fussy baby? Obviously the nuns might be up at 3 a.m. to pray, but it's a little different. How can their advice be engendered to us? Like, can you speak to that? Uh-oh.
Are we back?
Oh, we are back. Sorry about that.
Wonderful. Sorry. I don't know if it was on your end or my end, but.
All right. So can you tell us then what you think, how can mothers model contemplatives in the noisy life of the home? I guess that's kind of the back end of the question of what can they teach us?
Right.
So it's two questions, right? How can we model them, and what can they teach us?
Well, how can we model them? You mentioned, the mom was up at 3 a.m. with the fussy child. That was just me the other night. Something that the nuns told me that I thought was a very beautiful thing is that it doesn't have to be all that different. They're up at 3 a.m. to pray in the chapel in the quiet. And I'm up at 3 a.m. in the dark with a fussy baby who refuses to go to bed. That is an opportunity, right? They have been summoned to an opportunity to be in the presence of God. I have also been summoned to be in the presence of God through the face of my child. I think it was the Cistercian Mother Superior. She said, look for the face of God in your children. And so sometimes when it's 3 a.m. and I just want to go to bed, instead of grabbing my phone and, doom scrolling social media while I wait for this kid to finish nursing and go back to bed, I say, okay, who needs prayers? I will be like a nun in this moment. 3 a.m., an unscheduled hour of prayer. Here we go. The nuns are very big on finding little moments for prayer, right? The idea of praying unceasingly can be a real thing if you sort of expand your definition of prayer, right? I kind of fall into a rut where I feel like, it has to be a decade of the rosary and I have to be holding my rosary at the time, or it doesn't count, or, I have to be in mass and I have to actually hear what Father's saying and pay attention to what he's doing, or, I miss mass, in the back. And he said, no. First of all, don't pass judgment on your prayer. God knows the value of your prayer. You don't. And maybe you thought it was a complete mess, but if you were intending to give it your all and you were intending to get into the presence of God and to glorify him in your thoughts and your words and your deeds and in your very being, then maybe you succeeded better than you thought you did when you were patiently putting up with the 2-year-old back at the back of church instead of nice and perfect in the front of church, right? So finding moments to attempt prayer. Another thing that they suggested is to come up with tiny little repetitive prayers. They say that the great benefit of repeating the Psalms so much is that you get an earworm, and it's a prayer earworm. And that's not just, I got that stuck in my head again. That's another opportunity for prayer. Instead of just, I'm humming this, this Psalm, mean it now. God threw it in your head. Now give it back to him, right? Instead of just letting it go. That is another opportunity for prayer. So all these little things that maybe we don't even think of as a moment for prayer or an opportunity for prayer can be if we're kind of on the prowl for them. And I think that's how we can model them, because that's what they do. And I think that's kind of what they have to offer us. One of the Mother Superiors said, I'm not an expert on prayer. Nobody is. I'm an expert on trying to pray. And I thought,
Right.
so am I. I try all the time. Do I succeed? Well, I guess God knows. But I definitely don't know. And so looking for moments to try is sort of the key for how we can model contemplation in our own life.
No, it's wonderful. And I think that idea of opportunities to encounter God makes us, that is a kind of key connection with the cloister. That I love that you said that, to look at our children's faces, as a way, as a prayer, as a way to approach God. Because you're right. I can remember being a young mother. So I have 8, Mary, and my oldest is 21. So I've been there though, where I had 3 that were small and I was in the back or outside the church, as the case may be, and going, why am I here? Why did I come today? What was the point? And, the point was because God matters, that children should see that God matters, and that we make sacrifices for things that matter. And so maybe in the cloister, there's a discipline, right? A structure and a discipline that we can't exactly recreate in our homes for sure, right? We're not going to be getting up 8 times a day to say specific psalms, that sort of thing. We could try, but it probably not going to work the same way as it does.
And I would say probably most of the nuns would say, and we don't need to as laity, right? It's not part of the lay charism. I mean, some laity might be called to that, but I know if I tried to institute that in my family life, it would be a train wreck, and it would not help my children to do what I want them to do. I mean, we can only bear the glory of God for so long. Moses puts a cloth over his face, was that Isaiah turns to the cave wall when God passes through. With your 3-year-old just cannot sit still in church. It's a little bit like that, honestly. And
like, I've had enough of the glory of God.
I've had enough of you, God. Please, I need some distance. And we gain him gradually. Some faster than others, and trying to sort of force our children into a type of relationship with God that they're not ready for is more damaging to them. So I think the nuns would say, don't get your kids up at all hours of the night to try to model the monastic life. They're not monastics, right? That's the, but
modeling... have some forgiveness for yourself too. Because, like, if you're not praying like that, it doesn't mean that you aren't pursuing holiness the way God intends for you as a mother.
Exactly. So I am pursuing holiness according to my vocation, right? The nuns, I loved what I think it was one of the Capuchins said. She spends so much time in prayer with Jesus because he's her husband, and her husband deserves time with her, and she shouldn't just be doing things for him. She should be with him. And by that logic, I need to spend more time with my husband, right? And, and so God wants me to spend time with him according to the structure of vocation that he has given to me. And that means spending time with my children. That means spending time with my husband, because I am doing what God wants me to do, right? And praying with them as well is part of that. So that's how we can grow holier according to the charism of our vocation.
Yes. I also think, because, I've had seasons, I'll say, of parenting where I've had more time to get up before everybody else did and, do the spiritual reading and the meditation. And I really did feel like it fed my day and helped me be a better mother. And I've also had seasons like, well, shall we say the last year, where I did not beat the baby awake. And, and my morning started off with holding the baby while I unload the dishes. And that's pretty much been the last year. But even in those seasons, though, I found that the things that I did when I was able to sit down with the book and really read and have that hour to myself, I feel like that's still with me, and that we carry those seasons with us. And that's another reason I really, like I said, I loved your book, and I was kind of speeding through it today. I loved that the chapters are short. Because I thought, I've had such a struggle with trying to sit down and do spiritual reading. I said, man, I spent 10 minutes today and I read these wonderful answers from these beautiful women, and I can do that. right?
Right.
I can do that when the kids are when we're eating lunch or whatever, when there's like a little bit of a break. I can just pop open this book, and it's a little not quite as like there's some things like I've tried Teresa of Avila, and it's like if you don't sit with that woman every day, you're gonna pick up the book going, I don't know where I left off.
Right. What was she saying again?
She
Yes, I love her.
Gotta
One
reread
day
this.
in heaven, I want her to explain her book to me.
So now, is there a favorite chapter you had in the book, Mary, or even just a favorite concept or topic that you asked the nuns about?
I think my favorite, I think it would be about prayer and perfection, because I'm a bit of a harsh judge of my own attempts to do things, and I oftentimes get frustrated and discouraged. And the chapter on prayer and perfection I thought was very good in that they were speaking to a lot of things that I'm currently struggling with. The fact that I feel like, well, I didn't do that right. I didn't do that right. If only my kids would be quiet for 5 minutes, I could actually do that, and they help me sort of see through that and see things that I thought were obstacles are not obstacles. They are opportunities. And that I think that was very beneficial for me personally. As I was, getting the answers back from the nuns, it was always very exciting to be like, okay, this is what my struggle is today. I wonder what this Mother Superior is going to say that's going to actually fix today. Because it often did. It was funny. Like it'd show up in the mail and it'd be like, I needed this today. What is she going to tell me?
No, absolutely. And it's kind of like, in the newspaper when I was growing up, they had the Dear Abby column. People would write in and get the advice from Dear Abby. It was kind of, and obviously I'm not comparing the nuns to Abby, but the idea that here's a question and I'm going to give you kind of a concise answer that actually is insightful and might help you.
Yes, actually my joke title that I kept referring to the book as when I was writing it was Dear Abbess. Oh, so it's funny you should say that.
That's awesome. I love it. Oh my goodness. Now I'm going to think of that every time I read the book, but that's great. So I'm trying to think, as I said, I went through so many of these and you asked a lot of, some of them very layered questions. And I know that the nuns kind of, they spoke to some of these. What do you think about answering some of the ideas about, you mentioned this in the introduction too, about women who maybe like yourself, like you have a doctorate, right? But here you are living in rural Pennsylvania doing homesteading-lite with your children. Like, oh, look at all you've given up, right? To have this, the opportunities you could have done with that instead. And the same thing with the nuns in the cloister, right? Maybe some of them college degrees, whatever. And here they are raising farm animals somewhere and praying, right? Like, how did the nuns address that idea of, I think it was in the chapter on sacrifice.
Yes.
Yes,
I loved that chapter. Actually, I loved that chapter. It was a great chapter. Their answers were just very inspiring. There is, I think, a fear, or sort of a fear among a lot of people that if I commit to this vocation, I will have to give up so much. Both being a mother, especially a stay-at-home mother, especially a homeschool mother. And a nun as well, right? I think a lot of people think initially of all the things that you no longer can do, and that's real. That's true, right? I have given up a lot, but one of the beautiful things that they kept saying, and that I myself have felt, attempting very awkwardly to answer my own vocation, is that when you give up, you get back. Yes. In ways you didn't think you were going to get. The nuns talked so much about how, before they entered, they were like this, they did this, they had the opportunities for that. I think I quote Mother Mary Frances in one of her books in that chapter where, and if it wasn't in that chapter, it was in another chapter where, she was like, here, I've given God everything, and now I'm just going to be a nun. And then she enters and he's like, and because she was a scholar too, and he was like, and you will be my librarian. and you need to translate the books from Latin into English. And she's like, but I gave all that up for you. And he's like, nope, now you will do it for me. And I find that true in my own vocation, is that you give it to God. He'll find a way to give it back to you, but he'll give it back to you in a way that you at first might not recognize as the thing you gave to him. Because when you gave it to him with all of your ideas for its
and
value
your conditions, right?
And your conditions, right? I think it's in the sacrifice chapter. I reference a George MacDonald novel where there's this image of this character. She has to open up her hand, and she doesn't want to. And there's something in her hand she needs to open up and get rid of, to give away in order to achieve peace. And I use that image to describe sort of my grip on my own personal time. Like when I just had 2 kids and they both napped at the same time, and I had this 2-hour stretch of time that was wonderful, and I could do whatever I wanted to do. And then they didn't nap anymore, and it was like, oh, I have to give that up. And you don't want to give it up, and it's hard, and it is hard. It genuinely is hard. But once you give it up, if you give it up in the right spirit, you'll realize that God never asks you to give up something that you're not actually ready to give up. You might not think you're ready to give it up here, but you actually are able to give it up if you just will actually give it up, right? Like, when Jesus tells all of the people that he has just, cured, rise, take up your mat. If they're like, I'm not ready to rise, I don't think my legs work all that well yet. Like, they would never walk, right? He has given them the opportunity to take another step, right? And to take another step, you have to give up something in order to get, right? And the nuns kept reiterating that. It was wonderful hearing all these personal stories of, I thought I was sacrificing this and I got it back. But I got it back in a way that is now purified. It's now for his purpose and not for mine. And there are no conditions that I attach to it now. And I was like ready for it, right? To get it back at that point, because now I can use it the way he intended me to use it. But, even all of my good intentions didn't realize that was the way I was supposed to use it. I mean, just in my own personal life, there's, I've given up this hobby. I can't do that anymore. I've got little kids. I don't have time for that. I don't have space for that. I need to focus on them instead. And then it just comes back, and it's like, oh, you want me to do that again? For this, like my oldest 2 girls are American Heritage girls, and I used to do a little bit of like just weaving on the side. And then last year they're like, we're going to do the weaving badge. Does anyone know how to weave? And I was like, oh, I actually have all the equipment in the basement. And another mom was like, well, I have a spinning wheel and I used to spin until I had all these kids. And they're like, well, bring it. And she was like, really? I can do that again? And it was this moment where the 2 of us, suddenly it was this amazing moment where it was God was saying, remember that thing you liked that you gave up for me? I'm giving it back to you right here, right now. And it was just like, I can't believe it. That's amazing.
Absolutely. I think there's a priest who he's described something that he calls it, you have to sacrifice your excellence.
Yes. Absolutely.
That, if we want our offering to be like Abel's, not like Cain's.
Yes.
Right. Abel offered the best. And, it came back to him in the form of he was considered righteous. Right. And I think that's in that way, that's true in our motherhood. Like we give up. You're right. The time thing is huge. I think above anything else as a mother, and especially I would argue as women who've been raised more in, education is very important to me. Like I went to college. I encourage my children to go. And feeling like I'm spending my time doing these menial tasks, whatever they are. And so it was good for me to read like that, like, for example, Teresa of Avila, like she did all the menial tasks in the convent, the cooking, the cleaning, everything. She never shied away from those things. And here she was, this doctor, right, of the church.
Right.
And she did not look at those things as beneath her to do.
No, absolutely. Because they were done in love. Too. Yeah, that's the cool thing, is that anything being asked of you to be done in love, in service of your vocation, is not beneath you.
Yes,
absolutely not. And the nuns kept reiterating that, like, because they spend a lot of time cooking and cleaning and doing menial tasks, and it's to do it in love, right? It is because it is in service of their vocation. They are doing it for their spouse, who is Christ. And it's amazing because it's like, okay, I don't want to fold the laundry again. But if I fold the laundry for love, then it's not this annoying project that I have to get done. But now it's an opportunity.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's certainly the echoing the little way, right, of Saint Therese, that little things done out of love, they become bigger than what they are. And I think that that's a lot of true of motherhood. There's those hidden sacrifices, those acts of love that are a lot like the cloister, right? We don't see what those nuns do, but I'm convinced that the church would be lying somewhere in ashes and ruin without those nuns.
It would definitely be a colder place because they wouldn't have its maternal nourishing care. Nuns, I think that's another thing that I really gained from writing the book was that, even in moments where I cannot pray the way I want to, or I can't, do the reading that I want to do, there's someone out there at 3 a.m. who's doing it for me, that she is praying for me and for the church. And she won't ever know my name. I won't ever know her name, but she's out there praying for me. And it's nice to know that we have mothers in the church who are there for us.
Yeah. And especially perhaps when we're struggling with something, in our own motherhood. I have a good friend. Every time like I'm struggling with something, she does not have children, but she always writes to the Poor Clares to pray, right? And so that idea, like once again, that communion of saints, right? Like we're all connected. I did want to ask you, so what do you think about, we have the vows, right? The contemplatives take their vows, and we take vows too in our marriages. Yes. They're not the same, but you want to speak to that a little bit, like the vows of the two mothers?
Yeah, so I thought that was a very beautiful confluence when it came to, nuns as mothers and lay mothers as mothers, is that we both are sort of, our life is structured and our vocation is structured in terms of solemn vows taken before the church, right? And overseen by the church. And they're permanent. They're not meant to be broken. And I think that is a very beautiful sort of confluence because both vocations are being called to be ultimately creative, right? And you can't have the sort of creativity of motherhood without that stability, right? That vows give, right? The vows say, yes, this is me. This isn't just, this is a job I have decided to do for this time, ending at this point, or maybe not ending at this point, right? But you are taking a vow of sort of being. This is who I am. I am allowing myself to be changed by these vows, and that I will structure my life in accordance to these vows, because these vows are what will allow that maternal calling to flourish, right? Christian, women who are married, we are called to accept children. And I have some friends that would love to accept children and they struggle from infertility. They're still mothers, right? They're called to be mothers in a way that's a little bit more like the contemplative nun's motherhood than like mine. But they also have a vow to motherhood and to cultivate the maternal in the community of the home, right? And nuns' vows are to bind the individual to the communal family of the monastery. My marriage vows bind me to the communal family, the domestic church of my family. And those vows are beautiful because they are sort of the hard structure that allows us to function. If you think of your skeleton, right, it's rigid, but it's good that it's rigid. You don't want it to not be rigid, right? Its rigidity allows freedom, right? And that is what the vows are meant to be, both for a nun and for us, married mothers of children in the church, is that we need the rigidity of the vows in order to have the strength to move to create the community that God has asked us to create and to nourish.
And also to take it seriously, right? I mean, I could say, exactly. I'm going to get up every day and do this and this and this. But if it's just kind of something that I feel like doing one day and then not the next, it's not going to happen. I think the vows really do like sharpen and focus and say, I can really give myself to this. And right. I love what you said that, it's about becoming. The vows allow us to become who we're supposed to be. And to really give us something to take seriously. Like so much in our culture, just it's either ugly or you just can't take it seriously, or it's just a whim, right, in a bad way. So to have something real in your life, as a woman, especially in our culture, whether it's in the cloister or the home, to have something real that you give your life to is, I think, so important for our sense of being and belonging in the church. Exactly. We have to have that. We have to know who we are. I just was having this conversation with my older daughter just about, we have to know who we are, like what our character is and who it's founded in, who it rests in.
Right. And that was a beautiful comment. I think it was, again, one of the Capuchins said, is that we need to focus more on being and less on doing. Like doing is extremely important, but who do you want to be in life is much more important than what do you want to do in life. Because what you can do can change, right? The phases of life, the seasons of life, that will sort of change as the years change. But who you are, who you have committed yourself to be, that won't change, except in sort of the C.S. Lewis sort of sense of further up and further in, right? The whole idea of vocation is that we get better at it. We get more truly that which we were called to be. And that's the only way that our being changes, is that it grows. But that's how it should be, right? If we're doing it right.
And that because, sometimes we do the Martha Mary thing, like, oh, Mary knew how to be and Martha was active and, well, somebody had to make the dinner, right? But I think that through this discussion, I think a thread that's been coming out is, and especially the wisdom of the nuns, is that it's both, always, exactly. Both, right? Always. It's, what Martha missed was she still needed to be, even in the middle of the cooking and the cleaning. Like she still had to encounter God there in the dishes, so to speak.
Exactly.
And yes, but likewise, we also do have to find time where we just give God our full attention. And maybe for a mother, it's, maybe Mary Magdalene could do it for as long as she wanted, and maybe for a mother, it's more like 5 minutes, but then give God fully that 5 minutes.
Exactly.
Because I think it has to be both. I think we do, as mothers, need it.
And I think that was I think that was my chapter, prayer and work. I think was a chapter kind of later on in the book that the nuns and I talked about. This is that your work can be your prayer, but it can't be your only type of prayer. You also do need to have moments where you lay aside the work and you just are there with Christ. Just like, you can clean for your kids and you can cook for your kids and you can, prepare all these things for your kids, but your kids also just need you to be there with them, to existing with them as well. And your husband too. If you're just constantly in a mad rush to get things nice for him and you just aren't there for him, he's gonna feel it, and not in a good way, right? God needs that too, right? He needs us, he doesn't need much time, depending upon, how busy he has allowed our life to be, right? But he needs some of it where it's just us and him together. And I'm not, cleaning this thing in the corner.
Yes, exactly. Well, I mean, I think that there's probably a lot more we could talk about, especially, I mean, I liked some of the suggestions they gave about distractions during prayer. Nuns get distracted too.
Yeah.
And I like how she said, it's like, sometimes you have to look past over the shoulder of the distraction at
I
God.
love that image. Yes.
I think I'm going to start using that one when I pray. But I do. Gosh, Mary, I feel like we could, like I said, we could probably just keep talking about this book, and there's a lot of things we could talk about. We had a guest on, Dr. Carrie Gress, a few weeks ago. She was talking about feminism and kind of how it's, poisoned a lot of our culture, especially the way women think of themselves, how they interact with men. And I bring that up only because I felt like these nuns, they're the antidote to that.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Like feminism says, being in the kitchen or whatever, that's you being weak and controlled by men, and all that, subservient to them. And the nuns are like, no, again, when we give over that excellence that we have to God in love and to our families in love, that we actually become more fully who we are supposed to be.
Right. Exactly.
And it was just refreshing to read it because, I know I got bombarded by that, not from, my mother or anything, but like from the culture for sure when I was growing up.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of refreshing to read people who, I think they probably do have a cornered the corner on holiness just a little bit, that their advice was very refreshing to read in those little snippets about many things, distractions, sacrifice. Are there any other of the chapters that you'd like especially to highlight kind of before we sort of close?
Well, sort of on that note, the very beginning few chapters of the book, we do actually talk about feminism a bit. The idea of this universal call to motherhood, whatever that looks like. It looks different for a contemplative nun than it does for me, but then it also looks very similar in a way. But feminism tries to distract us from that call to motherhood. And so we just kind of talked about, what that universal call to motherhood looks like, and sort of what feminism has done to kind of damage us uniquely as women, and how to sort of push past that and to get back to a more authentic relationship with ourselves as women, right? To accept our nature as women. Feminism wants us to be fierce. It wants us to achieve. It wants us to, do, right? And it never focuses on be, right? And feminism doesn't talk about love nearly as much as it should. And when it does talk about love, it doesn't understand what that means, right? And I loved a lot of what the nuns said when they talked about, like, what is true femininity? What does it mean to be a woman? It always boils down to love, right? And love in this way that the modern world would see as weakness, because, it doesn't understand it, or it's scared of it, or maybe it never experienced it, and that we are, as women, it's exciting and wonderful, that we are poised at this moment where, if we embrace what we were made to be and who we were made to be with true femininity and not feminism, to embrace the idea of motherhood, that we can be this huge, powerful source of good for the church and for the world and for our families and for those who watch us as families too. That's also an important thing, not in a show-off way, but just people do see us. People do see us, and how they see us being. If we are responding with true femininity, with love, they see that. And that can thaw some icy hearts, and that can heal some wounds too that people might have. And it's amazing, like, what a contemplative nun has to offer. And she's hidden away, but she's exploding out into the world with all this beauty and this love that she has to offer. And as a mother too, seeing that and knowing that that's also my call, I think it's just beautiful and exciting. It's like being called out on the, in the battlefield and being told, like, you have this very important job, and your job is, is something that only you can do. And, we're not over here in the corner doing this little thing. It is a little thing, but it's also the world.
Well, especially if the vocation is eternity, right? Like raising those souls for eternity, then it's no longer about like, oh, you must be isolated, living in this, backwater, raising like angry minions all day. It's like, no, my scope is eternity, right? It's much bigger. I love that quote about St. Clair. They said, like, the world was too small for her, she needed a bigger stage for what she felt God was calling her to do. And I think sometimes it's important for, all you moms out there, especially those moms of those littles, God bless you. Like, that is such a beautiful but challenging season of mothering, that your job is so important. You're mothering for eternity, and there are women praying for you, in their own ways.
And I think too, mothering in emulation of Our Lady, right? Who is the greatest being in all of creation, the greatest thing that was ever created is Our Lady. And we are being called through our motherhood, and the nuns are called through their motherhood to become little Marys. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And she's definitely our model, and always, those days when maybe your mothering wasn't as great as it could be, you say, well, just get back up and try again. But yeah, I love that we're part of that community, and that these nuns are praying for us and helping us in our vocation as well. So I don't know, Mary, if there's anything else you wanted to say. I think that's a really beautiful place to maybe wrap up.
Sure.
We could touch the hot button of obedience, but maybe we'll let them read that. Save that for the book. No, I think you answered it well. I think the nuns did too. But otherwise, we could probably just close with our prayer. And I'm very grateful that you were able to join us and speak about your book. It's lovely. I truly hope those who are watching or listening order it and read it. You'll love these nuns.
They're wonderful nuns.
They're wonderful, and they each have, the different communities. They each have their own voice and the way they responded. But I just felt like I was reading, like the Dear Abbess column. Like, I was getting like this great advice. And Dear Abby they said it was not just one person. So.
Oh, well, there you go. We've got a bunch.
You should subtitle it "Dear Abbess." Maybe in the second edition.
There we go.
But let's go ahead and close with a prayer, because I forgot to do the opening prayer. I was a little flustered. So we'll go ahead and close with the prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Well, God bless you, Mary, and in your homesteading-lite journey with your children, your mothering journey. And we'll certainly be excited for any new offerings you put out. Maybe you should send me your dissertation so 7 people can read it,
All right, I will.
But otherwise, yes, please, again, everybody who's watching, you can get this from Tan Books, Mother to Mother. Beautiful book. You won't regret getting it. The nuns, they're beautiful. The things they have to say, easy snippets for the busy mom to read too, which I think is so important. So once again, everybody,
mom wrote it. A busy mom can read it.
That's right. Amen. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. God bless. Have a good night.
Good night.